Our group is Monica Leedle, Ryan Wethington, and I'm Jordan Fackler. And for our project, we're comparing and contrasting The Wizard of Oz, filmed in 1939, and Baron von Munchhausen, filmed in 1943. The Wizard of Oz was directed by Victor Fleming, and it was released in 1939. It's based off of a novel, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, written by Frank Baum. It stars Judy Garland, and it is one of the earliest feature-length films in full color. Baron von Munchhausen was released in 1943, and it was directed by Joseph von Bacchi. Starring Hans Albers, and the movie was based on a real person who told extravagant stories. It was released 4 years after The Wizard of Oz as a German fantasy film to rival The Wizard of Oz, and it was created by the Third Reich. There are a lot of similarities in the filming style. Both are filmed mainly in color, with part of The Wizard of Oz being filmed in a sepia tone in the beginning and the end. Both were shot in massive studios. They weren't shot on location. Both contained highly stylized sets and clothing that were borderline not in the realm of realism. Both are adventure and fantasy films. Both contain a large amount of music within the scenes, with one of them in The Wizard of Oz being a musical and Munchhausen having a lot of music within the various scenes. And both use cutting-edge filming techniques of the time as far as special effects and editing.
And the hats. So fresh. There are similarities between the storylines of each movie. The Wizard of Oz is an adventure film that has Dorothy waking up from a dream in the end, whereas Baron Munchhausen is told in a flashback showing as he explains his adventures many years later. Both deal in aspects of magic. Both go to places that are highly fictional from the real world. Each meets friends along the way that help them, and each finds themselves in the end, as Dorothy realizes there's no place like home, realizing her place in the real world away from her adventure, and Baron Munchhausen realizes that he no longer needs to go on adventures, and he desires to grow old with his love. This slide shows an example of each in the end, where Baron Munchhausen decides to age and no longer live at the same age, continuing his adventures, and Dorothy wakes up from her dream realizing what has just happened and finding her place at home. There are several differences in the filming techniques between the two movies. The Wizard of Oz, of course, was filmed in 1939, with Baron Munchhausen being filmed 4 years later in 1943, as the Third Reich desired to have a fantasy film of their own that would have huge success. Each were shot in the studio with heavy use of special effects, with more advanced special effects being featured in Baron Munchhausen. The Wizard of Oz begins in black and white in Dorothy's real world, then transitions to color throughout her adventure, and then back to black and white again as she awakens from it, whereas Baron Munchhausen is filmed completely in color. The Wizard of Oz and Dorothy's dream takes place in a fictional land, whereas Baron Munchhausen's adventures are based mostly on real places, but are obviously highly stylized stories.
So here are some of the differences in the storyline of the films. In Wizard of Oz, Dorothy is the lead, and obviously Judy Garland is female, and Baron Munchhausen, the lead of Baron Munchhausen, is a male lead. Dorothy is experiencing her story as we see it in the present, and Baron Munchhausen is reminiscing on his old adventures, so he is telling his story in the past. In Wizard of Oz, Dorothy has the central plot to go find the wizard so she can go home, and that's what the story follows the entire way as she follows the Yellow Brick Road. And Baron Munchhausen is telling different stories, so they're more subplots just of his life of adventures in general. The viewer in Wizard of Oz tends to pity Dorothy a little because she doesn't know where she is, and she's scared and lost throughout a lot of the movie, and that's why she relies on everyone else to guide her, because she is out of her comfort zone. And the Baron is in control of his situations for the most part throughout the film, and is in his comfort zone because he's adventuring, and that's what he does. And obviously, The Wizard of Oz is a full-on musical, and although Baron Munchausen has music, it isn't an actual musical. So here's just a little bit about the special effects from each film. The Wizard of Oz uses a lot with flame and fire. Every time the witch appears, disappears, there's a cloud of smoke and fire bursts out of the ground, and the projection of the so-called wizard's face when Dorothy's talking to him when he's behind the curtain is also a good special effect, as well as Glinda's bubble that she travels in. And in Baron Munchausen, he turns invisible, which was a very cutting-edge special effect. And then the special effect of the moon that they've created in the studio, as well as her body not being there, but her head being on the flower. So in conclusion, both were cutting-edge films for their time. And like I said before, Munchausen was the Nazi response to Wizard of Oz in the fantasy entertainment world. Both plots are similar, like we said, they're framed, and they both go on adventures, and although the lessons they learn are different, they both do learn some important lessons, which represent the values in the different societies. So pretty much Germans value like aging and adventure, and Americans value like going home and celebrating where you're from, and the hats.